very excited to have you here for our Winter Not Feeding producer panel. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that the members of the Living Lab, Alberta AgriSystems Living Lab, are grateful to live, work, and be in relation of people from across many traditional territories, covering all regions of Alberta. This acknowledgement is to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility to improving relationships and our own understanding of local Indigenous people, their cultures, and their knowledge. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christine Flam, who can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Christine. I kind of had the harebrained idea to have a producer panel, having some of our producers from the Alberta AgriSystems Living Lab come online and speak to their experiences. And one of the topics that had come up quite repeatedly on our feedback surveys from events and things like that was the discussion on extended grazing systems and delaying winter feeding and kind of getting around winter feeding as much as possible. So thinking about the amazing producers we have in our group on the Living Lab, it was actually pretty easy to come up with several different options. So I'm really pleased to have with us today Sean McGrath. He's from the Vermilion area. And everybody's going to introduce themselves as well. We also have Doug Skeels, who's joining us from the Rocky Mountain House area. And also coming in are going to be Alana and her dad, Al, hopefully, if he can get online in time, Min Chow from down in the Cardston area. So a pretty good coverage of different areas from the province. So hopefully something that's relevant for everybody. Straight off the bat, we're going to have our three producer groups just introduce themselves and go through what they're doing, what they've tried, a pretty brief synopsis, probably 5 or 10 minutes each. And then, like Adrian said, if you have questions or comments, please either raise your hand or post them in the chat and we'll address those as we go. Otherwise, we do have a series of questions that we'll be asking the producers to answer throughout the evening. And the idea is that you, the audience, get as much information from these guys' experience as you can. So please feel free to join us in the conversation. So without any further ado, hopefully we get Al online. But Sean, if you're okay, would you mind introducing yourself and your operation, please?
Sure. Sean McGrath, Round Rock Ranching. We are southeast of Vermilion, Alberta. So we're actually 4 miles north of the northernmost point of the Battle River. We would be just at the southern tip of Prairie Parkland, the northern tip of Palliser Triangle. And our operation is quite unique for the area because we are about 95% native rangeland. So our resource base is different than most. We have very little cultivated land. And we've been here a long time. So I guess the number of years ranching, I think I'm 48. So it's probably 48 years technically. In a management position for almost 20. We would typically run, so our full capacity is about 300 cows. And then we keep all our yearlings, but we'll adjust that number depending on moisture and markets and a bunch of things. So we'll overwinter somewhere between 300 and 600 head around our place usually, all in. So that would be cows and calves and bulls and all those good combinations. And we don't really have a start or an end to our grazing season, depending on how you define grazing. So we typically would graze native at the beginning of the winter. We usually aren't coming off grass, at least with the cows for sure, until 20th of January is fairly common. Middle of February is not uncommon. We will supplement those cows on grass twice a week with a high protein pellet for a couple of nutritional reasons. From there, we'll usually go to corn or swath or bale or some form of extended grazing system. And we are generally doing that with calves as well, where we'll background calves. We usually do that on bale grazing. It's been pretty bulletproof for us. We'll also do it with swath grazing, weather dependent. So generally we don't feed cows. Last year we fed cows for 14 days. And that was actually just to clean up our corn stubble. 2 years ago, we fed cows for 60 days, and I actually thought I'd lost my mind. Um, so we typically graze. I mean, our target is year round, um, and we're planning years ahead in some cases. We also keep a backup plan. We always have a backup plan just because of our resource base, and some of the things we've tried have been relatively bulletproof. Corn is reasonably bulletproof to snow, not to growing conditions. Bale grazing is bulletproof to all kinds of weather, not necessarily to the price of feed. So we kind of navigate that as we go, and we try new things all the time. So hopefully that kind of tells you where we fit.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Doug, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, we are Doug and Deb Skeels and their family at the Calagrass Ranch, Rocky Mountain House area. I don't know what the subregion is. We do have gray wooded soil here with very little topsoil. Number of years ranching is a good question. I've owned and operated cattle probably 50 of the 65 years that I've been around. Number of head, we're currently running about 65 head of cows, and then with the calves, we background our calves, and we've sold some of them now, but we generally background them into this time of the year and even later. Depends on market, depends on feed, depends on spring moisture as to how many critters we might sell and what time of the year. If the grass looks good, we will keep calves over until late in the summer. But the last few years we haven't had a lot of rain, and I've been getting rid of them early. Typical start, I can't tell you a typical start and end to a grazing season either. My neighbors generally figure on feeding their critters from the 1st of November until the 1st of June. I figure on having some form of feed available through all that time. But for the last several years ago, we started swath grazing, and then we gave it up because we were having so much trouble with wildlife. But a couple of years ago, we started again. I adjusted it how we do it. So now I wean our calves early in October. The cows go directly on swath grazing. And when that runs out, usually the deer and the elk haven't moved into it too bad yet. And then I'd move them back onto pasture, onto the stockpiled pasture. This winter, we grazed our cows until the 2nd of January between the swath grazing and the stockpiled pasture. So my cows have been on bale grazing now for almost a month. Years of experience, we've been bale grazing now for 15 years about, and my cows will be on bale grazing until they come home first part of April. We start calving later in April, and by then they'll be probably on half a ration of feed and back on stockpiled pasture again. So I don't know.
Yep, that sounds great. Thanks, Doug. Alana, are you okay to introduce yourselves? Is Al gonna make it or no?
I'm trying. We're almost there, I think. So
Go ahead.
I ranch with my dad, Alan, here. We're close to Spring Coulee, Alberta, in southern Alberta. So he's the real expert. So hopefully I can get him on soon because I'm just in the transition phase. But we're in I don't know the exact PPT zone, but we call ourselves like a brown soil region. The number of years ranching, my dad, they went on their own in 88, so about 36 years. So I guess that's how old I am, to give away my age right there. So but I've been back at the ranch for about 4 to 5 years now. So been taking over there. Dad's actually in Arizona. That's why he's not here with me. So I've been holding down the fort while he's there. Number of head, we do about 200 cow-calf pairs, so mother cows over the winter. We generally start our grazing around the end of May, early June, depending on the year, what Mother Nature's had in store from previous years. And then we generally try to push our grazing till like mid-November. Depends always on the snowfall here, what we get. We don't do we do a mixture of feed and swath grazing. So we were feeding up until December, and now we've been swath grazing again for the last month. But we used to do it a lot more here, but we had a lot of deer in our neighborhood that were found our grazing quite lush. So we were feeding for a lot more, but we've gone back to more swath grazing. So we'll see how long that should last us, another probably 3 to 6 weeks here now. Years experience in extending the grazing through rotational and through the winter for my dad has been about 25 to 30 years. They've been doing it on and off since then. Hopefully I can get him on because he'll probably be the only guy who just doesn't love bale grazing. So, but he can give his opinion on that when he's on. So, but yeah, so we mainly have done swath, and we tried corn as well, but the deer again liked that way too much, and it didn't really grow that well in our region. So
Great. Thanks, Alana. Hopefully your dad can join us at some point. So I'll just start off the conversation back to you, Sean. Like, what first got you interested in extending your grazing season and like avoiding winter feeding?
So we'd always graze longer than a lot of the neighbors. Even back in the 90s, I remember, I mean, grazing cows at Christmas time and that kind of thing. And the truth is, we came back to the farm in '02, and it was basically, for lack of a better term, it was a hell of a wreck. We had 3/8 of an inch of rain total that year. And so at the end of the year, we had a couple of loads of cows that we sent to southeastern Saskatchewan to get fed. And the cows that were left at home, we didn't have any feed, and we didn't have any money. And we actually wound up grazing on prairie that year until the 20th of January. And I mean, that's a core part of our system, is that winter grazing. And just, I mean, doing that and realizing why had we been feeding cows for the last 100 years on our place when they were perfectly capable of feeding themselves. And that really got us pushing really, really hard. And then the next year, I think everyone remembers what happened in May with BSE. So I'd like to say we were super innovative and ahead of the curve, but a lot of it was driven by disaster, like lack of rainfall, lack of money, and you just being forced into how creative can you actually be to make this happen. And now it's kind of just it's kind of a fun thing to figure out on the go.
And how much of that though is your landscape, Sean? Like you said, you're upwards of 90% native grass. Like how much, like that must have a huge part in your grazing plan, right?
Oh, it's massive. So we would be about 5,000 acres right now. There's only two directions on our farm, up and down. I have 60 acres cultivated. I have 200 acres of tame grass, and the rest is native. So to maintain our stocking rate and stuff, we really strongly rely on that winter grazing piece.
How do you balance that though in the spring with the tame grass pastures, like with avoiding your native grass?
Yeah, or we'll plan our rotation. So we will graze native all different times of the year, but we will, like, I'm already working on my grazing plan right now for 2027, end of 2026. We're that far out.
Well, good for you. That sounds great. Doug, so you're out in the Rocky Mountain House area. What were the local conditions that made extended grazing work better for you, or was there anything that made it harder for you in that area?
Well, there's both. conditions are both helpful and a hindrance depending on what we get, because we don't ever know what we're going to get. The weather, if it's too warm, it's not really great for bale grazing because you wind up with more feed fouling. But if it's -10 to -20, that's about ideal for that operation. If it's really windy, it's not great, but the cows can stand a lot of wind if they got some shelter around. Wildlife damage is a big deal for swath grazing for us. If we try to swath graze later into the winter, the deer eat our lunch literally. So I don't know what else to tell you about that.
Well, that was an adjustment you made though, right? Like you tried
It
the swath
is.
grazing later on and
Yeah,
found like it just didn't work, right? With the wildlife, was that the
Yep.
primary concern?
that's correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
originally we used to run our cows on pasture until it ran out, and then we'd start swath grazing in December. Meanwhile, the deer had already moved in there for 2 or 3 weeks, and you can't keep your fences up when they're in there, and they foul the feed quite bad.
Yeah.
So you lose way too much. That's why I basically quit it for a long time, and then I thought, well, if I adjust it, maybe I can make it work, and it does. So
So when do you move on to the swath then? Just so make sure everybody got
second
that.
week of October.
And that's before you run out of pasture.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I just make a plan to move them onto swaths at that time of year. I also set out my bale grazing with the idea that I may have to be on bale grazing from the middle of November or the 1st of December until April. And so any bales that I don't use, I'll sell them in the spring. No problem.
Oh, wonderful. And Alana, are you okay to have a comment?
Sorry, what was the question?
I was just
Was
gonna
it the first
ask
one?
you about like the conditions down in southern Alberta for swath grazing. Like you guys don't do that much, right? Because of the conditions there?
Yeah, we used to do a lot more. We used to almost try to do 2 to 3 months of our year in swath grazing. Our biggest issue was we were having about 300 deer feeding on our swaths every day, which was, it just ended up not being productive. They were picking through and leaving nothing of nutritional value for our cows. So we had to stop doing it for, gosh, at least 5 years. We've been down here for about 17 years. We used to do it when we lived up in northern Alberta as well. But now the deer haven't been as abundant. We had a few harder winters, and I think it's helped, and they got out of rotation on our fields. So at least we've been able to go back to that, and because we find it way more beneficial, and I think it's better for our cattle, and it's also better for our time as well.
And was then the weather ever like a big concern with the swath grazing? Like, did you have problem with the wind, or was that actually not like a big part of the issue?
It's a win for comfort, I more so say, but you can go out and do it. Especially now that we have like the razor grazer with thicker wire, we don't find it's as much of an issue. But if I go, like the other day, I set up a fence and we had really high winds and it had blown down 2 of my fences. So the cows were able to get through it. So that's probably the biggest issue we have with the wind in our area, is that it doesn't stop us from doing it. Sometimes we can get high drifts, but our snow melts so much that I wouldn't say it stops us from swath grazing.
Okay. I see Al's joined us, but I'll give him a minute to get online. Doug, I saw there was a question came in for you. It says, what was Doug's adjustments that he has done to reconsider swath grazing again?
It was the time of year that I did it. Instead of waiting until my pasture ran out, and then pasture had also run out by that time for the wildlife, and so they move into my feed. So I saved my pasture and move into the swath grazing early. And if whatever pasture I get after that, I'll take. And if I don't, I'll use it next year.
Okay. Yeah. Great. That's a great answer. Thanks. Al, are you there?
He's sorting out how to unmute. I think it's on your bottom of your screen, Dad. He's on his phone.
Yeah,
I don't remember
that's
what it
okay.
looks like on the
I'll give him
phone.
another minute and then he can introduce himself. Sean, to come back to you.
There I am.
Experience. Oh, you're here, Al?
I think so.
Sounds good.
That's
Thanks so
what,
much for joining us.
yeah, us antiques here are not too swift.
That's okay. I'm glad you could make it.
You bet.
I'll give you a minute just to get settled. We'll keep going with a question and then you can come back and introduce yourself, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So Sean, in your experience, those years of like all season grazing basically, which extended grazing strategies have worked best for you on your operation and why?
Oh, that is the answer is it depends. 100% it depends. We have, like I have bale grazed calves through snow so deep that I had snowshoes and was hooking the wire, the razor grazer, the portable wire on the top of the barbed wire fence, and it was down at my ankles. The snow was so deep. Um, with corn, it's always been an issue of growing season. If we get enough heat units, if we get enough moisture. So that's been, um, with the prairie, it's an issue of, do we have enough snow for water? Do we have enough snow that ice, I mean, if it melts and ices up, that'll stop us fairly quick. So it's a variety of things that we adjust for. And so we just have, I don't know how many systems or plans we have, but we always have at least a plan E to F, it seems like. Usually by the end of the winter, we're on plan L or K.
That's a really good point, Sean. Do you want to touch on what you do for water or the strategies that you have for water with your winter not feeding?
Yeah, so typically, our cows eat snow. So even when we wind up bringing cows closer to home, a lot of our older cows wouldn't even walk in for water, like they'll just eat snow. Last winter was an exception. We had tremendous grazing. We were on grass till well, I think it was the 20th of February. We brought cows home. We were back on grass the 14th of March. Um, but instead of going twice a week, I had to go and cut ice every day because we had no water, right? So, um, yeah, it's really, I don't know what to tell you about other than you have to really be adaptable and adaptive because it's going to be different every year, and you've always got to have a backup plan in the back of your mind.
How much corn grazing is it that you're doing? Like how many acres and how long does it last you?
Um, very little now. We did quite a bit for about 10 years. We've gone back in and done some 20-acre test plots the last 2 years just to try some new varieties. But it's quite expensive and really in our area, very prone to growing season conditions. So it's hard to plan because we've grown 320 cow day an acre corn crops and we have grown 120 cow day an acre corn crops. So even the cost varies from under $1 a day to 350. So we've kind of moved away from it a bit.
Okay, well, I think Al's with us. So Al, Alana's already introduced your guys' operation a little bit, but if you wanted to just also introduce yourself and your winter not feeding strategies that have worked for you just briefly, and then we'll let you just join in on the conversation here.
Okay. I think I did hear Alana. We give her the introduction or
Okay.
about us and that. So I don't have much to add to there other than it's similar to what Sean said about you have to be ready to adopt and change because it's different from one area to another, especially in our country. We were up north. I think one thing Alana left out, we started in this about 17 years ago. We were in northern Alberta, just south of Edmonton, but now we're way down southwest of Lethbridge, up on the Milk River Ridge, and we have an altitude of about 4,500 to 5,000 feet. And you think of Southern Alberta, you think you can grow corn, but they haven't developed a heat unit variety low enough that we can grow it. We tried it one year, as Alana mentioned, but it was a disaster. The deer liked it, but there just wasn't enough of it and that. And we've loved the bale or the swath grazing. You have to be careful some years of having too much snow. It's not unusual to get 2 feet of snow in a dump. Some years that all melts and is gone, and other years it'll only half melt and gets frozen over. So you have to be ready to supplement those cows with regular, normal feeding, putting out hay or straw with it and that. So we have springs here that we can rely on for water. If there's lots of snow out there with the swath grazing, they won't come home as much to water. They will, eat the snow, as you mentioned earlier too. So, but you have to have an alternative source available for them in case the weather direction or the conditions don't agree with what your plans are, you might say. So.
Alana was saying that you don't like bale grazing. I'm dying to know why. Why
Yeah,
doesn't
we'll go against the grain on this one. I know it'll stir up a lot of controversy. The biggest point of people will say, well, it's so good for the soil. Well, so is swath grazing or any other type of grazing. When you're out there, all the nutrients get replaced back to the soil, or 80% of them will. But we'll have found by bale grazing, where they don't eat all the bale, it's inefficient, I find, for the amount of feed that you lose that they trample. And also it takes about a year or two before that grass will come through where they have been bale grazing and that. So we try and stay away from that as much as possible. I just feel cutting up feed and giving them enough for that way, or swath grazing, or extended grazing on stockpiled grass works better for us. We've had at times enough stockpiled grass to last them well into December, but then we'll get 2 feet of snow. And so we have to be ready to pivot to another way of feeding. Now that or stockpiled grass will be there for them in the springtime once the snow all goes, and that's still available there. And we're trying to go more that way, to more stockpiled grass as compared to swath grazing, you might say, because we have lots of deer here. It's not uncommon to have 200 to 300 head of deer on our swaths. And unlike swath grazing, where you can control the cows to 3 or 4 days worth at a time, the deer will, you can't force them to eat the stalks and the stems and the leaves. They'll just eat the grain part of it off. So we've had to adjust there. So we're hoping that that'll continue for us right now. Okay.
Well, I wonder if you guys would take a page out of Doug's book and move on to the swaths before you're out of grass and beat the deer to it.
That we tried that one year, but if it, even in November, but we can have 16, 17, 18 degree days, and cows aren't happy about going from grass to dried up swaths or grain and stems and that. So we'll find we won't put cows onto swath grazing until it gets real cold, a cold snap of like 10 below or something like that. Then they're quite happy to go onto it. Otherwise, no, we want that grass.
Okay, fair enough. I saw a question come in for Sean. Follow up on your watering. Says, Sean, what is your next best plan for water if the snow ice is up? A second question, is there a depth of snow where the cows will not go after the grass?
There's a couple answers to this. So I have a gas powered ice auger and an axe. And if we have to, every pasture, last winter we were drilling holes in the ice in the creek every day all winter. We feed test our pastures and our swath grazing and our we supplement. So we actually supplement a high protein cube twice a week on pasture. And it's more to trick the rumen so the cow can actually intake more and can do well. And again, it's very snow condition dependent, but sort of a rule of thumb on our native, once the grass gets over a foot or the snow gets over 1.5 feet deep, somewhere in that 1.5 to 2 feet. The cow burns up more energy get through the snow to get to the grass than she can actually get out of it. And then we got to start working on plan B. If it's 45 below, we'll supplement pellets every day just to keep that body condition on that cow if we have to. Swath grazing, the limit is the Ford logo on the hood of the half ton.
Wow.
But I would also add that those cows are trained. So as an example, we bought some cows this summer that came from a place where they had fewer life skills than maybe the cows at our place. And our home raised cows, we turned them out and they're gaining 100 pounds in December. And these bought cows really, really struggled. So there's some education in there too for not just the cowboy, but the cow sometimes too.
Yeah, that's fair. Like not all animals are gonna respond exactly the same, but like just then, a summary there, like you do actually have pasture water available. It's just not, you're not, breaking it open every day if there's snow out there, but you do have it wherever the cows are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a second question here. What % is considered high protein cubes?
Well, we're feeding at 24%. I don't know that that's anything special or anything, but we're feeding at 24. Like an alfalfa pellet kind of thing would work as well.
Yes, and your snow depth, that's all on your native pasture, right, Sean? You're not
Yeah,
grazing anything
on our tame stuff, if we graze it, we rake bunch it. And I have no idea how much snow it would take for a cow not to be able to get to that pile.
Okay.
Doug, do you have a snow depth that turns you on or off of a
Well, same kind of thing for the swath grazing. They can dig through quite a bit of it as long as it's not really hard. But at the bale grazing, I like Sean. I got snowshoes. It's I've had to use them. I've had to cut even taller rebar posts because the ones that I had normally they're wires under the snow. So there's no limit for bale grazing. Sometimes the cows don't want to get to the bales if it's really deep and hard. But if you make a track with snowshoes, then they'll get there.
Actually, I was gonna ask you, Doug, like what type of fencing are you using then, like for your swath and your bale grazing? Because you guys do get quite a bit of snow, right?
We can, yes, we use aircraft wire, this 1/8 inch cable with rebar posts in the wintertime, just on cheap reels because they get taken down and buggered up some. So that's the ones I use in the wintertime. I use the expensive reels with poly wire in the summer, but in the winter I use cable.
And are your pastures all have permanent fence around the outside and then you're just cross fencing inside with temporary?
That's correct. Yeah, we set everything up with permanent fences on the outside, and then for my swath grazing area, the same. I just have the fence on 4 sides, and then I portion off a piece daily in the swath grazing usually for however many cows is going to be there. The bale grazing, we actually set out our area where we're going to bale graze, and I'll run a permanent single wire fence on both sides so that I've only got the cable to run just across the distance of the bales. Keep it as short as I can because it's less trouble with wildlife that way.
And how
So
do
what are
you
you
guys,
using?
sorry,
Sorry, go ahead,
I was
Adrian.
going to ask, how are you guys getting your rebar or your posts in the winter?
I got a little ball peen hammer. Ball peen hammer puts them in, and a little pipe wrench takes them out.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, I got a little Thor hammer and a pipe wrench, and now that I'm old and lazy, I have a Milwaukee drill and a 1/2 inch masonry bit, but I paid for the 3 foot long one, so I don't have to bend over very far.
Alana and Al, what about you guys?
Alana?
We got the Milwaukee drill, but we haven't invested in the long bit yet. So I was down on my knees the last few weeks drilling in, and we just use the plastic posts and put them in. So yeah. And then Dad concocted a thing that we have to pull them out when it's really frozen, but it works.
And what are you guys using for your power? Is it batteries like with solar backup or vice versa? And how hard is it to keep that power on with the snow?
Doug?
We just have our permanent electric fence that we set up that's solar connected in, but we haven't had any issues with it. I guess if we needed backup, we did invest in the razor grazer last year, so we would be able to go out with that if we had any issues for our end.
Doug?
I use the same fencers that I use I use them year round. They're solar powered, and I have big batteries for backup when there's a few days of bad weather. I use the same ones year round, no trouble. Everything's solar powered.
Same for you, Sean?
Yeah, big plug-in mains, solar, and then we're actually on our native, we're seriously looking at some of the grazing collar technology to help us manage on our bigger, rougher winter places.
Wow.
So I see, hi Colby, we've got a question from one of our other Living Lab producers in the Q&A, and he's curious what you guys are finding for the simplest or best grounding rod system in a high snowfall window. When the snow is plentiful, grounding is an issue, he finds.
Well, we use a lot of razor grazer rope now in the winter. We've tried cable, and I've got lots of friends that swear by it, and it's never worked for us. So the razor grazer rope is thicker. It's worked well for us in the winter. As far as grounding the other pieces, occasionally when we've had real issues, we've got a fencer that will do bipolar, which you'll have to look up on the internet because I don't know that I'm capable of explaining it. But it will stop cows. Not elk, but it will stop cows.
Doug?
I've got several ground rods drove in the ground, and my cows don't bother the electric fence very much. I've found in the past, if I had a cow that didn't pay attention to it, she goes to get the new home. And generally my cows won't go, I can leave the power off. They won't touch it. I found actually last year, after I'd been bale grazing most of the winter, I found a place where their fence wasn't connected, and I had been grazing bales for a month with no power. No cows found out.
They're trained.
Yep.
What about you guys, Alana?
Yeah, honestly, we haven't had issues with it, but we don't have to do like the mobile grounding. We have the power set up all through our place that's permanent. So it'd be more so an issue for us from our home place. So that wouldn't really be an issue for where we're grazing because it's all interconnected.
Perfect.
Alana, just to ask you a next question, like what have you tried and what are you using for shelter for your cows while they're out in the winter?
Yeah, so right now we're in wide open country. We don't have any trees here. So our primary source of shelter is we have corral, we have windbreak fences that we have access for them to. In certain areas, if we're going longer grazing, we have deep coulees that the cows will just naturally go down into that have brush and that. But when it's really cold, they get access to our corrals to come in. we're actually starting to look at winter grazing in a new location, and we're just right now starting to build out a shelter belt as well. So we hopefully can have more options for winter grazing to extend it in the future. It's really hard to get trees to grow out here though with our soil and that, but that's the long-term plan. But we have like extensive windbreak fence that we use for our cattle and our coulees, so the natural elements.
Doug, are you also using just like natural windbreaks out where you are? Do you bring in much for shelter?
I built permanent windbreak fences near my winter watering systems. So the cows have always got access to that. That's, yeah, they got some trees and that as well, but they've always got access to the windbreak fences near the winter water, so.
And how about for you, Sean? Is it mostly just natural shelter out where that you're using?
Location dependent. Any of the native grazing is tons of natural shelter. At home, we've got portable windbreaks. Sometimes we'll give access to the corrals. I've got one that I built out of a old Harrow drawbar that's quite portable. And then I use straw as my backup plan. So I have miles of straw stacked in rows that I can just put an electric wire around and use that sometimes as well.
So a bit of a more technical question. I'll just get your guys' opinions on this. The BCRC, or Beef Cattle Research Council, says you can save up to $2 per head per day by using extended grazing. Has this been true in your experience? And are there savings other than just dollar value that you've seen? Doug, why don't you start that?
Well, there's definitely big savings if you're comparing stockpiled grass or any method you want, I think. Well, bale grazing might not be quite as much due to the cost of the feed, but the swath grazing or stockpiled grazing is far cheaper than anything else you can do, in my estimation. What was the rest of that question?
Are there any other savings other than just like the monetary value?
Well, for most people, it would be the diesel fuel and machinery costs that go with it. With your traditional grazing system or traditional feeding system, in these systems, you don't have much of that at all. My bales are all put out in a day or two, and then through the winter, I don't need a tractor to feed cows. With a small herd, it's far too expensive to be running machinery. It's
Sean, thoughts?
$2 a day is low, and it depends. Like bale grazing is more expensive. Corn is more expensive. Last winter on our stockpiled native with my yardage, so that includes my time and my fuel in my ice auger and pellets. We were at $1.15 a cow a day. You know, as soon as I brought them home and had to feed, we were over $4. You know, so it's huge. The other big saving on the other end of the year is like there's no corral cleaning bill. Like a lot of that type of infrastructure and costs. And then the other one that is a big driver here. So just an example, last year my daughter decided to play every high school sport in grade 12. I'm not sure I missed a game because I wasn't feeding cows every day. Right. So it's, you know, depending what you want to do life balance wise, and risk wise, because anybody here can move a wire, or I can get a kid to come and cut ice. Or if I break my leg, I can still, you know, we can still move a wire. I can still, you know, so from a risk perspective, it's actually, I think, less risk than having to go out every day and feed your cows.
Alana, does that ring true for you? I know that you're just in the process of learning from your dad and trying to take over more. Like, how do those benefits sound to you? Like, especially on the risk side, you know, with your young family and for you trying to manage ranching over winter on your own.
Yeah, no, definitely. I have a baby and a 3-year-old, so I've been lucky that they came out the other day and they could sit in the side by side and do that while I was doing the fence. Cause yeah, there's only so much you can do in the tractor. And even from my perspective, like I don't know how to fix machinery. That's never been my forte. And that's the main reason we're going to this extended grazing more so and changing more of our land over to grass is because I don't want to have to deal with a busted bale buster or a tractor. Like we're already as Sean and Doug mentioned, like we're saving so much money when we can extend this grazing season per cow. We all know that's where you have to make the bank on your cattle. So, um, yeah, that's why we see huge benefits when we don't have to start our tractor. Like I'm only starting it every 3 to 4 days, maybe every 5 days right now, max, when I have to feed a few cattle in the corrals. But it's been a huge benefit to have it. And yeah, I would agree that we would agree that the $2 per head is a minimum savings when you're able to do this.
Wow, great.
I have a neighbor down the road and they put in enough corn for corn grazing so that they can go to Mexico for 2 weeks. That's part of their holiday strategy, is some extended grazing techniques to Sean's point in terms of labor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple questions here on the Q&A. How do you figure out the cost per day of grazing grass? Doug?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer.
Sean, do you have a way that you're calculating that?
Every answer in this webinar seems to be it depends.
Yeah.
We have some grass that we pay on a per head per day basis. That's pretty straightforward. The stuff we pay on a per acre basis, we track, well, we do anyway, but we track our cow weights and our cow days, and we calculate it on an adjusted how many animal unit grazing days per acre we've taken off that, whatever, X number of acres. And then we'll also track our labor and include our labor costs in that. And then we'll track any minerals, supplements, that type of stuff that we're feeding and add that to the bill too.
Yeah, so these are basically, they are real calculations that you guys are making like every week, or like, are you planning for that ahead of time? And as much as
Yes.
possible. I guess. Okay, and there was a question here also on the Q&A. Is stockpiled grass pasture that is just left standing for winter grazing? Doug?
Yes, but that's what you have to go organize your grazing season with that in mind. You can't just let the grass grow all summer and have the cows go out there and eat it in January. They'll starve to death. You got to go out there with the idea of making it good palatable feed when it goes into the fall. So you graze it lightly earlier in the season is my strategy, and let it come back. And you're still going to have lower than optimum protein probably, and a little bit of supplementation with that makes lots of difference. But that's the idea, is you got to plan for it.
And there's a question here for Sean. How are you tracking your weight, Sean?
We weigh cows probably 2 to 3 times a year, and we weigh calves at weaning, and then over the winter we'll probably weigh calves another 2 to 3 times before they go out on grass and when they come back in the fall.
Do you think that's more often than many producers would do?
Yeah, and we're not making a special case, but cows like will weigh when we do our pre-breeding vaccines, they'll get weighed. The yearlings all get weighed when we do our carcass ultrasound. The cows will get weighed when we preg check. So it's not like we're making special trips.
Okay.
or anything like that. But every time a cow comes through the chute, she just gets weighed.
Doug, how often are you guys weighing?
We don't, I have a scale, it's not set up yet.
I'm sure it'll be interesting when you get it going.
Yeah.
Alana, how often are you guys weighing?
Yeah, we don't have a scale, so we get our weaning weights and we take our replacement heifers and we weigh them at the start, but we do best guess, honestly. And just by the fit check, you go out and look at them, I guess.
Okay.
Dad, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think Al has something to say. Wait, he's gonna get
Hey
it.
there.
There he goes.
Yeah, we don't weigh them. Not every producer has a weigh scale. So we have an idea what our cows weigh just when we sell them to a market when the cull cows go in, but we go by body condition score more than by weight as to evaluate how much do they need and where they are at for what they have to be fed or adjust accordingly.
So then that's a great question for you guys. What's the ideal body condition score that you're looking for
I would say 4,
out of?
5
Okay, and is that going in or at the end?
going in.
Okay,
If your cows are in good shape coming into winter, you don't need as high a quality of forage as you do if they're, let's say, in a 2 or 3 body condition score. If they're in a lower body condition score, it takes a lot more higher quality feed to get them back up to that number 4 number on it. So, and if you're going to feed higher quality feed, that means a higher cost then too, of course. So,
for sure.
but
Doug,
to me, that's the biggest thing is bring your cattle into winter feeding in good condition.
Doug, do you have anything you'd add to that?
Oh, I think he's right. My cows seldom get to 4, but I like them at 3.5 going into winter for sure. It's one of the reasons why we wean early.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I'm 100% on that message. Yeah.
And then
So
if I
go
can,
ahead.
just as the follow-up, like what, so when it's back on pasture, like what's the condition then generally? Or what are you going for? That they're just like, Al, are they just at like a 3 or you still want everybody still at a 4 to go back up?
I still like them to be at a 4. Generally, when they go on to pasture after they've had their calf, they might be down at a 3 then. So that's where you can bring them back up. Green grass will pick it up pretty darn quick, to bring their body condition score up. Within a month's time, like let's say by early July, they will be at that point in time and still producing really good milk for their calves too. So, but if you have them in good condition, you'll have a lot easier time calving. If you have them over fat, then you can run into into problems that way too. So that's why we don't aim for a 5 condition score, but 4 is a good condition score. So then, as I say, when they go onto grass, they're probably at about a number 3, but they're giving it all to their calf through their milk type of a thing. But then when you get to green grass, that'll pick that body condition score up. So by midsummer, they'll be in number 4. And if you got poor grass, like let's say 2 years ago, like the summer before when we had drought conditions, your grass is not available there. We were fortunate in being able to rotate between pastures to keep them up there. We did sell off 10 cows, but we didn't have to drop down as some producers did down to the, where they reduced their herds by 30, 40, 50% or more. So we only reduced our herd by about 5%, just so there was good enough quality grass to keep our cows in that condition.
So there's a comment, what is the average weight of the mature cows that everyone's running?
Ours are about 1450.
Doug,
Ours are just over 1,400.
Sean?
Ours are, as of a week ago, they're about 1250.
Okay. Colby had another question for you guys. He's read about meadow brome and Sicer milk vetch for being higher quality for stockpiled forage. Has anybody tried that?
Yes. Meadow brome is good. We haven't tried Sicer milk vetch. I shouldn't say we haven't tried Sicer milk vetch. We've tried it, but takes a long time to get it established. So we haven't had good luck establishing it.
Give it time.
Yeah.
We have a
Patient.
reclaimed gravel pit that we graze, and it is abundant Sicer milk vetch, and that is God's gift to winter grazing.
Okay.
I mean, it's high protein, the stems stay soft, it's palatable, it's it's quite a good thing.
Those are that's just your tame pasture though, right, Sean?
Yeah, that's a reclaimed gravel pit that
Right. Okay.
we rent. We used to hay it, but they don't actually take all the rocks when they do a gravel pit.
Yep. And there's another question here, Sean. How are you feeding protein cubes on pasture if there's lots of snow?
I have like a home built high hog type wheel made out of an old fuel tank on my bale deck, and I put it in 4-wheel drive and I drop it on the ground and I drive as fast as I can possibly go so that I don't have to walk home.
So they're just out on top of the snow.
We'll use it to move cows around. We'll actually do it through brush as well. So we'll use it to take out buck brush. We'll use it to take out big patches of silver willow, which isn't the greatest thing on the truck, but yeah, we just make it work.
Another question just came in. When does everyone calve and wean? And did the extended grazing aspect of it factor into your calving time? Doug, why don't you start with that one?
I start calving the end of April and I wean early in October. And I'd calve that time of year anyway. I like to calve in May.
And how did that factor into your extended grazing time? Or like, did you adjust for that or no?
That's my preference anyway, but it works out good because the grass is poorest when it's late in the winter. So your cows are at the highest need right after they calve. And so you want them to go on to decent pasture. Either that or you're going to have to put out some pretty good feed for them. And the way I am, they're going back on pasture in May that's got some green growth in it. So they're getting some old and some new, and they're just fine. Their nutrition is good.
Great. Alana and Al, your calving and weaning dates roughly?
Go ahead, Alana.
Yeah, we start early March for our calving with our heifers, and then mid-March with our cows, and then we wean generally at the end of October is when we do it. Drier years, 2 years ago, we did it early October. So the cows usually can stay out. We usually bring them home from pasture to wean, but then we try to keep them out on grass a little bit longer for as long as we can, depending on the conditions.
And how did the like extended grazing play into your calving and weaning period? Did you change anything to kind of work around that or no?
I don't think so. We didn't. No, we didn't change that at all.
Okay.
We like to just get them calved out in that March and April, as Alana said. So when the green grass comes, those calves are a little bit older and can take that extra milk that those cows produce when they do go onto green grass.
Sean?
Start calving about the 5th of May. We generally wean October, but we've been experimenting the last couple of years with actually pushing that back a long ways. And haven't really decided yet which we like better.
Like pushing it back later in the year?
Yeah, last year we weaned in February,
Okay.
so as a bit of an experiment, and I actually, yeah, we're still learning. I'm not sure I don't like it.
You're not sure you don't like it. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure, yeah.
you might like it.
There's pros and cons.
Yeah.
You know, and for us, the winter grazing piece, like if we can put second trimester dry cows on native in December, there is no excuse for that cow not to gain 100 pounds. Right? They can really do a job. So yeah, there's pros and cons to either way we've done it. Now we're trying to decide what fits the best.
Right? It looks like Colby's got another question. If a producer is looking to underseed acres to perennial for stockpile grazing, are there any particular species you would recommend to add to the mix for energy and protein? Well, Alana and Al, you guys are doing a project not unlike that. Do you have any thoughts on what you might recommend?
Oh, yes, I'll tell you in a few more years, but
Yeah.
definitely meadow brome is definitely a good one. I agree, Sicer milk vetch would be good, but it's really a hard one to get established. We find in this area, meadow brome, fescue, more of those type of, that plant family is a lot, was what we'll try to do for that, year-round grazing or late midwinter grazing and that. So, but meadow brome and fescues, and maybe a bit of alfalfa in there too. But of course, alfalfa isn't as good for midwinter grazing because you lost your leaves already in that. So that's more for, we'll do a graze in early summer and then leave it until fall then.
Doug, have you done any pasture improvements along those lines that you would recommend?
Some, but that's a work in progress. It's, I do also like the Sizer milk vetch a lot, but it takes a long time to get going. It seems, I've had more luck with it spreading naturally than I have trying to grow it myself. It's a great plant late in the year. It's the only thing that's green in November, and the cows like it then.
Yeah. Sean, did you want to comment on that one?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Is there anything that you guys wouldn't recommend for species
Mm.
for winter grazing?
Timothy.
Why?
And why? Why not Timothy?
It just doesn't have the nutrients to it, and the leaves fall off too soon. It just develops more into a stem, and doesn't retain the leaves. Where meadow brome, if you can hit it once so it doesn't go to head, it'll just develop a lot more leaves to it in that respect. So same with your fescue grasses too.
Doug, anything you wouldn't recommend?
Probably the Timothy, yeah. Fescue is great. If you, yeah, I'm on that.
Sean, are we 3 for 3 for no on the Timothy?
Yeah, I struggle with Timothy.
Okay. We have another question. Do you have a preference in regards to cattle breeds that work best for extended or better for extended grazing?
It's good to have one of the British breeds in your crop or in your
Mix?
herd. Yeah, in your mix. Yeah, that's whether it be Hereford or Angus or Shorthorn. That's up to. I think that's a personal preference. Like right now, Angus.
Why a British breed?
I think it just in their genetics, it's they're just an easier keeping animal. Don't require as much maintenance to gain the same amount a weight to them, or and more efficient at what they do graze to keep them up there. But you do need an exotic breed in there too to work, I think, the best.
Maybe it might be then of interest for our listeners. Would the three of you mind just like briefly describing what your like typical mix or goal hybrid mix would be that you're raising?
Ours is Simmental Red Angus is what we use.
Mhm.
Found that to work, but we've tried Charlet, and weren't happy with that. But Simmental Red Angus really works well for us in our area.
Doug?
I have Simmental Limousine. I'm more interested in the cow's type than the breed. They gotta have some capacity. If they don't have capacity, you're beat to start with.
What do you mean by that?
They gotta have a rumen capacity. If you get a cow that's half leg and half body, she's not gonna work.
Okay. That's an interesting thought.
Another way to put that, Doug, would be you want a cow that's deep in her heart girth, right?
I do, yep.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Sean?
We are actively working. For us, we can only, in our situation, we can only handle about a quarter. So we run about a quarter Simmental. Not the traditional type like reds and blacks, easier calving, less milk. Moving towards a quarter Simmental, quarter Hereford, and about half Angus. And we really restrict, like we control milk. I don't want milk, even 20s pushing it on terms of an EPD number. I agree with Doug about the heart girth and the depths and the capacity. We are finding, so having purchased some cattle and doing a bit of work on the feed intake side, I'm very concerned about feed efficiency, but in our situation, I don't want cattle that can't intake a large amount of feed, because I know if I've got a very low quality feed that I expect them to gain weight on, they need to eat a lot of it. Right? Like you can gain weight eating ice cream or you can gain weight eating lettuce, but if you're going to eat lettuce, you got to be able to eat a lot of it. So we're concerned about that maternal efficiency and just the ability to intake and extract nutrients from some of that poorer quality feed.
Those are great thoughts. Thanks, guys.
Does anyone want to talk about the indicators or the behaviors or the clues that your cows might give you when you're working with some of these extended grazing situations or strategies?
If they start losing body condition, I guess that's the first clue that you need more nutrients to it, and you have to be supplemented, whether it be with, as Sean does, with alfalfa cubes or protein cubes, or what we will do is supplement with lick tubs. But I'd say if they start losing body condition, then that's the biggest one. And that could either be feed or lack of water too.
Okay. Doug, do your cows talk to you about what's going on at the buffet?
Yeah, they do. If I go out there and they just pick their head up out of the snow and then they just go right back to grazing, I don't worry too much. But I do bring Dad over every so often and just have him look at the cows, because a person who's been away from them for a while will notice a change in condition a lot quicker than a guy who's looking at them every day. So that's my way of doing it.
That's a great comment. Very true. Yeah, good point, Doug.
What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, we'll watch manure a bit. We'll watch those behaviors. So if they're running to the gate, well, something might not be right. And we run all our cows in one big herd. So my expectation is it's sort of a little bit your problem, not my problem if you're the cow. But we do watch our young cows a little more closely, especially our first calf heifers that are rebred. We watch them as a pretty good indicator. They're an early warning sign for the rest of that herd.
And you had touched on it a little earlier, Sean, that you'd purchased some cows that were maybe having a hard time adjusting. Does anyone want to comment on, the value of having cows and retained females that have grown up in your systems and what that means versus bringing cows in? Doug?
I try to raise all my own. I never had very much luck with cows that I bought staying in the herd. So especially heifers, the really high loss rate on them in the first couple of years. So I find that my retained heifers, I can retain probably 80% of them past 2 years. And after they get past the second calf, they're good. They're gone. They're good. But I think they need to be raised in the environment they're going to be in. And they shine better.
Yep. Sean?
Yeah, so for us, it's a combination of learned versus and genetics. And that's one of the reasons we've been experimenting with this February weaning thing. And we were actually thinking we might wean steer calves early and leave the heifers on the cows longer. So that learning that winter grazing, learning the pastures, learning the plants. From a genetic point of view, our place, we don't have a lot of high octane fuel for these cows. So from a genetic perspective, we're trying to breed Volkswagen Beetles, not Formula One cars. So that's part of it. And what we've started doing is we keep every heifer. I breed every heifer. I don't select ahead of time. But we only breed for about 21 days. And what that's done is I still have quite a few open heifers in the fall. But they've all gained weight, so they're all worth more money. And the bred ones all calve in 3 weeks. And our conception rate has gone up every year since we started doing it. And our rebreed on our 2-year-olds has gone up every year since we started doing it. So we put a lot of pressure on heifers. We don't push them. They're gaining half a pound a day right now. And really push them through their first breeding season. And it's made a big difference in our cow herd in the long run.
And then you're marketing those open heifers, the ones that don't catch?
Yeah, because they're basically coming off grass as grass yearlings, or some will finish out and sell as grass finished beef direct.
Okay.
Alana, do you have anything you want to add?
I think they covered it pretty well, but yeah, we keep our own replacements as well. Everything comes from our own herd as well. We haven't bought in a long time. So I would agree, like they learn a lot. They're used to your land. Like I even remember when we moved down here 17 years ago, there was just some cows like that couldn't handle these hill, and you would often find it in the lineage of that it was like the mothers and the daughters that we would notice. So that was an interesting when we did move our herd south, that some cows just aren't as don't acclimate as well to different areas. So it's definitely easier if they can grow here and be bred and see and learn from their mothers as they're going through it, and they've done better on our behalf too.
Perfect. So we have another question for swath grazing. When would you seed the crop, and then when would you cut it?
Doug?
So it depends on what you're seeding. I grow a lot of oats and triticale as a swath grazing crop, and I generally try and seed that early June. And then I want to cut it when it's in the dough stage. I don't want it to get too mature. Early dough. Preferably before the frost in September, but that's pretty much unknown here.
Yeah, you get a bit of earlier frost than I think the other guys. Probably. Al and Alana?
We have to seed here as early as possible, like end of April, middle of May, to take advantage of the spring moisture, because we don't have a lot of rain once we get past June, especially into July. So that means we're cutting it by the end of July, early August type of a thing. And in that mid-doe stage, you definitely don't want to let it go to the, the past that, in my opinion anyway. The early to mid-doe stage is, for us, is the best. But yeah, we have to get it in early to take good of the early growing conditions, because you can't count on rain in June and July here.
Sean?
Yeah, we would be early June. Our swath grazing is always a mix of cereals and lots of times forage, rape, other cocktail cover crops, trying to boost that protein up so that we can supplement with cheaper straw if we do need to supplement. We're trying to grow protein in place. Yeah, we need to be early June. We try and cut first, second week of September, and then there's regrowth in that. Like those forage rapes will grow to even a freeze to -7, and they'll come back growing the next day. So we're trying to get swaths, but in a perfect year, they'd be buried underneath all the stuff that's growing again on top of it.
There was another question here on the chat. Curious about everyone's take on their cattle temperament with the extended grazing. So kind of what we were talking about earlier. Do you check every day, walk the herd, or what would you say the temperament is by doing these practices? Doug?
My cows are super quiet. I do check them every day because I want to know if the fence is up and the water's on.
Okay.
And I walk, they don't pay any attention to me. I have to get them out of my way. And they're that way all year round, because every time they see me in the summer, they think it's new grass.
Right. Yeah, they're happy to see you.
You bet.
Al? Alana?
Alana, do you want that one?
Yeah, we'd be out every day or every second day probably, because just making sure they still have enough on the swaths at the start to see how long it'll actually last. But we have really quiet cows as well. We do rotational grazing in the summer as well. So sometimes I don't like going out there because then they think they should get new feed and they follow me, but they got to sometimes learn that, oh no, you got to clean it all up. But no, it always helps. The more you're around your cattle, it always, I think, eases their temperament. They just get used to you better. But yeah, our herd's really quiet.
And I'm sure that's where that bringing in outside cows also, you can really see that, right? When if they're not used to being walked around or handled or looked at even every day, you're really going to notice that, right, in those animals.
Oh yeah, they do. And one thing, going back to the earlier question about temperament or different conditions too. When we did buy cows, we always tried to buy the same body type to make sure that they would fit in. But as Lana said too, the hills really sorted the poor cows out.
You got quiet cows, Sean, or you see them every day?
Quiet but ornery. And no, we don't, like when on bigger pastures. So lots of times, even when we're calving, just depending on our rotation, like we calve with a pair of binoculars. When we handle cattle, it's a group process. And our system, if I touch a cow for anything other than AI or vaccination, we put an orange tag in her and get rid of her. So even if I treat a foot rot and she's better in 3 days, in the fall she's gone. We've just got to a point where we don't put up with any of that. So they're quiet, but we don't baby them. But again, when we're moving cows every day, you show up with the Suzuki truck, and they go through. They're there right now. But as far as moving cows, like we do everything on horseback, and if you're on foot, they just run around you and laugh. But if you show up on a horse, they know that things are serious, and they're quite well behaved.
I don't know, Sean, I've found with mine, because I do all of my work on horseback as well, and it's kind of a joke now. I'm more of a Pied Piper than I do any actual chasing. I call and they follow me on the horse to the next pasture. And I think, again, that's a consequence of the rotational grazing, extended grazing.
Yeah. And it is like, we found these cows we purchased this summer. So you couldn't chase them. They'd only ever been called.
Hmm.
And for us, that was a tremendous adjustment. And I didn't like it because when I brought pairs up, I prefer to be behind with a horse to make sure all the calves come. And so our cows are trained to herd as opposed to like
Follow.
with the little truck, they'll follow, but with
Yep.
the horse, they're trained to herd. And so it's every time we change the system, it's a learning curve for the cow and for the cowboy.
Yep. Yeah, so mine are set. They'll come if I call, if I'm on a horse. And if I'm on a horse and I start whistling from behind them, then that means we're moving. So same thing. You set it up, different things mean different things. And if I'm quiet, I'm just riding through them. Don't move. So yeah, it's amazing what cows can adjust to.
Yep.
We've got one more question. Are you interseeding the swath crops on grassland?
We
Doug?
yet.
Oh, go ahead, Al.
We haven't yet. I'd like to find the way to be able to do that. That would be efficient and effective at doing it. It would be good. Yeah. But we haven't yet. No.
Doug?
We have a project going with the Living Labs, but it's difficult. I've seeded into sod lots with all kinds of different things. I have no trouble getting germination, but I've yet to seed anything into sod that's been very competitive in live sod.
Doug, one of your projects with Ag Canada is looking at doing like a light glyphosate as well, right? And then seeding in?
Yeah, that's correct. And
what have you found?
that worked better, but it hasn't been great. The spot or the strip that I glyphosated and then seeded into actually came back more red clover than anything else. But it has generally a short life, so I should see in the next growing season how that's really going to turn out. At least I'm hoping so.
Fingers crossed. And some rain.
Yeah.
Sean, what about you?
Yeah, we are doing some interseeding in terms of pasture rejuvenation stuff, and then we've been experimenting on our own with actually seeding forage peas into standing pastures.
Mhm.
And that's been, obviously it's an annual, not a perennial, but that's actually been showing some really exciting things here.
That's really interesting. Sean, have you done any pre-soil sampling and post-soil sampling? I'd be curious about nitrogen fixation.
We have done some, we've done NDVI, we've done yield clips. So we haven't, and like I say, we haven't done a lot of it, but it's boosted our yield. Well, we had 1,500 pounds more dry matter an acre. Our crude proteins jumped, and then our NDVI values were just indexed. If I index the stuff that was the original ungrazed at 100, the stuff we actually put forage peas into NDVI at 142% of that.
Wow.
So we're encouraged, and it's relatively inexpensive. Like we're like $10 an acre or something, right? So it's yeah. I don't know what our actual question is, but we're kind of messing around with that. It's been kind of exciting.
That's really interesting.
Mhm.
There was one thing the next one I was gonna ask, how far in advance are you guys planning your winter grazing? Like, is that basically starting now for this year? You're building that into your grazing plan, or can you wait and kind of put that off later on in the fall? Alana?
No. Yeah, we would essentially be starting now. Sometimes you have to start a year, 2 years out, depending on your grazing. Like, we're essentially starting with our fields like 2 to 3 years out to extend and return some of the land back to pasture. But for our swath grazing, that it's at least a year out that we have to start looking at it.
Doug, you agree?
I do. Yep. She said just what I would say.
Yeah, and Sean, you were saying you're planning for 2026 already, so yeah, obviously quite a bit in advance to get everything ready to go. Is there anything you guys are doing with the livestock to get them ready for the winter grazing? Like for the body condition, Al, you were saying you want them up at a good condition, and Doug, you guys too. Is there a way, like bringing your cows that are used to it, I guess, know that they're just going to be on grass grazing. But if you were to bring on for people who are just going to be starting out or thinking about trying, like what type of conditioning or planning would you try and do to get your livestock ready if you wanted to try extended grazing? Doug?
I think you'd want to break into that relatively carefully and slowly. I
Okay.
don't think you'd want to go cold turkey, plant a bunch of stockpiled grass and have a bunch of stockpiled grass and brand new cows that never seen it before. That you, yeah, I would think you may be in for a wreck. But I would say go at it slowly. Same as, you know, you might move the cows 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month this year and try a little farther next year. And I don't think you want to go from no winter grazing to full winter grazing. I don't think it'll work for you.
And maybe even like trying just one strategy this year, like maybe just swath grazing or just bale grazing, not going corn and swaths and bales, or do you think it would be a problem?
I think you can try whatever you want. Here, corn's really not much of an option for me. I don't get enough heat to grow corn. But as far as swath grazing or bale grazing, they're fine. You can pretty well count on it. So
You guys agree, Al?
I would agree with what he said there. Yeah, definitely don't go whole hog into it right off the bat. Be ready to have an alternative for it all right enough. It's like the corn that Alana mentioned earlier. It's a good thing we didn't go whole hog into it because it was a disaster, so to speak. And also too, if you start into swath grazing, you have to train your cattle too, like the very first year or two that you get into them, because that first time you put them onto it, they're going to stand and beller at you after the second day thinking we want better stuff. You know, we've ate the grain part off, we want more. If they've come off a pretty good grass feed and you put them onto this dry swath grazing, it may take them a while to realize, okay, this is best for us, or this is the way it's going to be for the rest of winter. So just as I told one of our neighbors when he got onto it, I says, walk away from your cows for those on the third or fourth day, because they're probably going to want more, but they still will have, as long as they got feed out there, it's still good for them. But you have to train your cows to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have I had a neighbor tell me that sometimes when they'll make a change in the feed and the cows are unhappy, they'll swap. So someone else will go feed somebody else's cows and like they'll go away for the weekend
Right.
while they're making the adjustment because your cows are more upset with you than like, well, I don't know. This
Right.
random guy showed up and he's feeding us his stuff, but I guess
Yeah. Don't weaken.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would echo those comments a lot. And I think be prepared to observe closely so you can learn about like the timing of when should I move cows on my swath grazing or whatever system. Have a backup plan. And if you're starting on it, like in our experience, when you're starting on it, don't start on swath grazing on the 10th of January with 2 feet of snow and minus 30. Like if you can start them on it in November, -5 and an inch of snow, there's cows that can actually learn their skills by the time they actually have winter to deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same thing, Sean, like if there's a break in the winter, right? Like the weather we're having right now isn't a bad idea maybe to make a change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll learn your skills yourself as you go along. Like each day I've been moving, you'll learn your land too. Like when you get into a lower dip of your land, like there is likely going to be more feed. So you'll have to be familiar with your own settings as well to see there might be certain times where even if you would do the same distance of fence, there might be more feed in that strip. So you have to learn how to just go out and check every day and see what they might need as well, because it will change from that perspective.
So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or the Q&A. So a reminder for the folks that are with us still, if they have any burning questions, to sneak those in. And I guess we could ask our panelists if they have any final thoughts for the folks that joined us tonight.
I actually had one more question.
Oh, I'm
that I
sorry.
did that I did want to ask the group while we've got them here. Just because I think it might be interesting for our audience. What about like the herd health benefits from having your cows out as opposed to having them in the corrals or at home all winter? Like, do you notice a difference like in the health of your cows, or like their happiness or anything along those lines? That you think is beneficial for people to consider if they're thinking about extended grazing? Al?
Definitely. That's a good question, because they definitely are in better shape, just generally because they're walking more. Their
Right.
exercise there's
Yeah.
than people. They have to walk to water.
And
Whether
that's probably something that people don't really consider,
no,
right?
no, yeah, I don't. Yeah, you're correct. Very, very right on that. Yeah, they don't look at that aspect of it. Just by that movement, they're constantly walking and staying in shape. Everything is working better. Their whole digestive system, just by walking out, whether it be a half a mile or a mile or more sometimes to get water. That's nothing wrong with that at all. It's good for them. It warms them up more too by their walking too, and that you just have to be prepared to have shelter for them. I think the other two fellows, they've got bush in their areas where we don't have any at all. So we do have some slab fences up that they can come into to get out of the wind, or if there's really bitter cold days. And another one too is one thing we did when we were still up north there, and we get that 2-3 feet of snow for the cows to go into, we would put some horses in with them too, and they would start pawing in the snow and start into the swaths. And once a cow gets into a swath, it will go. It'll just put its nose down and keep going on it. But sometimes if it's too deep, they can't find it, as Sean was saying earlier. You don't want to turn them out there on a 20, 30 below day. So, but if there's lots of snow, just put a horse in with them too. That'll help too.
That's a good comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doug, you think the same?
Yeah, our cows gotta walk anywhere from 200 to 800 meters for water, and they do, unless there's new fresh snow. Otherwise, they'll walk to water. And one thing about not just necessarily the winter feeding, but I think the rotational grazing in the summertime, is haven't treated my cows for parasites for several years.
Right.
And as it breaks the cycle if you move their pasture outside of what the bug cycle is. So they do fine. They do good.
And Sean, same for you? Any additional
Yeah,
comments on that? Herd health?
the walking, the fact, so in our winter system, because our grass isn't growing, we'll graze big pastures in the winter. Just the fact they can spread out reduces that lice parasite issue. And then the other thing is that when our cows are on snow, they'll actually graze. So if you put cows on a quarter of grass and there's snow and you're not cutting ice, when you come back, there'll be a footprint on every square foot of that whole quarter.
Right.
Those cows. So, I mean, that their needs are being met. And so I guess technically they're not walking for water, but they're constantly moving and expressing. And yeah, and the other part, you watch the condition, and those cows are gaining weight and they don't care if you're at the gate. Those are good things.
That's nice. Okay. Yeah, those are some great comments, actually, guys. Thanks. I do agree with Adrian. We've taken plenty of your guys' time. Unless there's any other burning questions out there. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you wanted to contribute? on your winter grazing, or any other recommendations for people that might be thinking about trying it out?
There's no time like the present. Get started.
Maybe next fall, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, start thinking about it.
Yeah, everybody's solution is gonna be different. They'll have some common threads, but just from a financial and lifestyle point of view, I don't know how you can afford not to investigate it and be open-minded enough to actually try it before you say, well, that doesn't work here.
Right.
I would echo those comments very much. For lifestyle and economically wise, it's definitely the thing to look at.
And
'Cause you-
even from this perspective too, like I have a mentor in my dad. If you're looking for or you want to go see if one of your neighbors is doing it, go talk to them. Don't be afraid to reach out to different people, especially in your area. If you see somebody doing it, they'll be able to give you a better thing. Because as you can see, each one of us are in different areas and have different circumstances. But if you can talk to someone and get an idea of what's worked for them, that'll save you a lot of headache in the long run. You don't maybe have to make the same mistakes they've done in the past.
Yeah.
So lots of thanks from our participants in the chat to our panels. I think we could finish with, this was great information. Thank you so much for your time. I feel more confident regarding my herd.
Wonderful. I'll just
Great.
plug, we also have another producer panel next week on Wednesday with the topic of rotational grazing for your pasture cell design, and what some of our other AAL producers have tried and failed and tried and succeeded with in terms to rotational grazing. So if anyone is interested in attending that,
And it'll be the same format as this one. Folks can
same
ask
format.
questions. So
Okay.
perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our folks who attended.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, Sean,
Thank you.
Alana, and Alan. It's been great. Thank you very, very much for coming.
Thanks to
Thanks,
you, girl.
everyone.
You're
Good
welcome.
night.
Good
Have a
night.
good night, everybody.
Guys.
Hope you guys stay warm on the weekend. I know I am.
Yeah, thanks. We'll
That
make
hurts.
Yeah, right.
it.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.